Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our Ethnicity in Maritime Roundtable. We are delighted to have you here this afternoon, where we'll be talking about microaggressions, looking at what these are. Some people hopefully will be sharing some examples. I certainly am happy to share mine. And then we'll be talking about ways of calling it out and calling it in. But for the moment, I'll just hand over to Chrissy for a little bit of housekeeping. Thanks, Chrissy.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Good afternoon and welcome to our second Diversity in Maritime Lunch and Learn for London International Shipping Week. My name is Chrissy Clark and I'm the Head of Diversity and Operations for Maritime UK and Secretary to the Maritime Skills Commission, and we're really delighted to have so many of you joining us today. Today is the second of our Ethnicity in Maritime Lunch and Learn series. We held our first last year during Maritime UK Week, and we're delighted to be having such an honest and open conversation about ways to call out and call in racial microaggression. A bit different to our network sessions, this session is being live broadcast, and we will be sharing the recordings afterwards. There will be an opportunity for Q&As, so do please put some questions in, and we'll absolutely come to you during the session. So now I'm going to hand back to the chair of our network, Cecilia, to say a few words.
Thank you, Chrissy. So I'm Cecilia Harvey. I'm the chair of Ethnicity in Maritime, and I'm also Royal Haskonian DHV's Global ED&I lead. Today we have a hybrid event, so we have some people in the room with us. So I'm going to, and also some people online, and I shall be handing over now to Samar, who we have in the room with us, and to introduce herself.
Thank you, Cecilia. So my name's Samar Addo. I work at Baltic Exchange as a marketing manager and D&I lead. I also host the Ethnicity Network Book Club, which some of you may have attended or heard about. And yeah, that's my little intro, I guess.
Great, thanks, Samar. And Graham, we have Graham virtually, so I'll hand over to Graham to introduce himself. Good afternoon, Graham.
Good afternoon, I'm Graham Kerr. I am the Royal Navy's D&I policy lead for race and ethnicity. So what that means is that helping with D&I training and equality analysis and all things D&I that focus on race and ethnicity within the Royal Navy, Royal Naval Reserve, and branching out soon, I think, into the RFA as well, but not quite yet.
Excellent, thank you very much, Graham. And we have Debbie also online with us. Good afternoon, Debbie. I'm not sure whether Debbie can hear us, but we have Debbie Calvadoro here with us this afternoon as well, from Nautilus International. And later on we'll hopefully be joined by Louisa Joseph and Richard Bannatyne. But to start the conversation off, we thought we'd play you a TED Talk on microaggressions and some varying ways to tackle these. So watch and please do contribute, have a think, and put anything that you have in the Q&A. We'd be delighted to take your questions. Thank you.
Listening to me. I come to y'all because most Black women don't go to Ku Klux Klan rallies on purpose. I did because it was my job. I monitored hate groups. But I really wanted to find out how people could hate strangers so much. Mostly I wanted to work for peace and justice, but fortunately for me, my mentor at the time was the legendary civil rights leader, Reverend C.T. Vivian, who'd been an aide to Dr. Martin Luther King. And C.T. used to say, when you ask people to give up hate, then you need to be there for them when they do. Now, at the time CT said those words, I started muttering under my breath because you can't curse out a preacher, you know? But his words didn't make any sense to me because if the Klan hated black folks, I was all right with hating them back. Sounded okay to me. But then something happened. It became my job to help people who were leaving hate groups. And then once I got to know them, I couldn't hate them anymore. And then I got confused. I'm a survivor of racial violence, rape, and incest. And I needed to find another moral compass for my life's work. And that compass had to shift from hate to love. And so that improbable journey is why I'm here to talk to y'all today. You know, because I really, really want to build a culture and a world that invites people in instead of pushing them out. It's called a calling in culture. Now, some people really do believe that the only way to do human rights work is the way they want, you know, my way or the highway. But the problem is when many different people think many different thoughts and they move in the same direction, that's a movement. But when many different people think one thought and they move in the same direction, that's a cult. And when you treat potential allies like enemies, you're behaving like a cult, not the human rights movement. My friend Dazon Dixon Jallow, who's a very smart woman, says that she believes that calling in will be to this digital age human rights movement in the 21st century what nonviolence was to the civil rights movement in the 20th century. A new way to understand how to truly achieve justice. It's not a matter of what we do, but how we do it. Now, all of us know what calling out is. Our cancel culture, as it's called. You think somebody has done something wrong, you think they should be held accountable for it, and you think they should be punished for it. So one of those calling out examples is, I can't believe you just said that. You're racist, sexist, toxic, manipulative. With this approach, you've guaranteed one thing. With this blaming and shaming, you just invited them to a fight, not a conversation, because you're publicly humiliating them. Now, some people actually think call-outs should be used to hold powerful people accountable, and there's a lot to that. I mean, that's what the human rights movement has always done. But most people are calling others out of fear, or they're feeling that they need to belong to something. And some people think that they'll feel better about themselves if they put somebody else down. And then there's too many people, in my opinion, who think that they can become famous by defaming somebody else. Most of us want all of this violence to stop, but we don't know where to begin. And most of us stay silent because we're afraid that we'll become the next target. So even if something feels unfair, we're silent. And if you're unlucky enough to have something that you've regretted captured on cell phone or in a tweet, you're walking around with an unexploded gotcha bomb just waiting to blow up your life or your career or your reputation. I guess I need to ask, how many of us here have done something in our past that could come back to haunt us? One of my students once said, a call out is not an invitation for growth, it's the expectation that you've already grown. This is the culture we're trapped in now. On the other hand, there is calling in. Calling in is a phrase invented by Lone Tran. And basically, A call in is a call out done with love. So when you think somebody has done something wrong and you want to hold them accountable, you don't react with anger or hate. You just remain calm and look at them and say, and you can do this online and in person too, forget that part. But you just look at them calmly and you tell them, that's an interesting viewpoint. Tell me more. With that, you've invited them into a conversation instead of a fight. And you don't have to agree with somebody to offer them loving attention. All you're admitting at that moment is that there's a possibility that they're as complicated as you are. And everybody deserves to be heard and to be respected. And if you use this call-in practices like I'm teaching, what you'll do is several things. First of all, you'll lead with love instead of anger and allow somebody else to grow. Secondly, it'll affirm your own inner empathy and your compassion. And you'll feel so good about yourself when you learn that you can grow too in embracing and inviting more people into the world. And then the third thing is that you can call in your friends, your families, your neighbors, your coworkers, all the people you might have given up on in the past because of how they've hurt you. Now, if you're going to embrace this calling in practice, you need some preparation. It begins with self-assessment. First of all, you need to know your motives. Why are you choosing to call somebody in or out? Are you in a healed enough space for somebody else's feelings? If you're not, maybe you're not ready to do the calling in yet. But still, you have those options. And I've taught these tactics to 8th graders, to college students, to C-suite executives. And as I said, they all feel better about themselves for reaffirming their optimism and their hope that they can make a difference in the world. This is so, so important. And so if you're not really ready to invest in somebody else's growth with a call-in, or you don't want the inevitable fight if you call them out, there actually is a third option. You can call on them to be a better person. And this was a phrase created by Sonia Renee Taylor. My favorite calling on response is to look the person dead in the eye, cock my head to the side, like I really care, and say, I beg your pardon, and then I wait. Many times they'll start walking back their words just because I'm looking at them like they lost their minds. We can use this calling in, calling out, calling on approach as part of the spectrum of responses we can make to each other, and that's so, so important. One time, let me put it this way. One time, I misgendered a student in my class, and I froze in shame because I expected the student to jump down my throat, because misgendering somebody is a really big deal nowadays. And instead, this student looked at me and offered me grace by saying, oh, that's all right, Professor. I misgender myself sometimes. An 18-year-old showing me grace. Now, I believe that one of the most effective expressions of calling in is forgiveness. And the most powerful example of radical forgiveness I've ever seen happened after the 2015 church massacre in Charleston, South Carolina, where 9 people were killed. And one of the victims' sons, Chris Singleton, offered his mother's killer, forgiveness. And I can't get his words exactly right, but Chris basically said, forgiveness is more powerful than people realize because it lifts all of this stuff off of you. It's freedom, freedom from revenge, freedom from anger, freedom for hatred. Sadly, he was called out for saying that. I believe that it's very possible to use these strategies. So I'm going to tell you about my Uncle Frank. He ain't really my uncle, but he's still living, so I can't call him out. Anyway, he came to a family reunion and decided to talk about Mexican Americans stealing jobs. And everybody been chatting and eating quite happily till his racism silenced the room. Most people buried their faces in their plate because this was Uncle Frank. This is what he does. But I decided to respond, but not with anger. I kind of organized a few comments and asked him a question. Uncle Frank, I know you. I love you. I respect you. And what I know about you is that you'd run into a burning building and save somebody if you could. And you wouldn't care what race that person is. You wouldn't care whether they were gay or an immigrant. So Uncle Frank, that's the man I love and respect. So tell me, how can I reconcile that good Uncle Frank I know you are with the words that just came out of your mouth? You haven't called him in. You haven't called him out. You called on him to decide how he's going to be. And with this approach, he's less likely to become defensive because you haven't actually attacked him. And while he's organizing what to say, you've affirmed that he has options about how he wants to be, especially in his niece's eyes and his family's eyes. But most importantly, the third thing you've achieved is that you did not let his bigotry go unchallenged. And that was witnessed by the entire family, how you stand up to bigotry at a family reunion without hate, argument, and throwing over the table. Now, anybody can learn these tactics, as I've said, and we really need to understand that we can offer people forgiveness and a chance to redeem themselves from their mistakes. Somebody gave us a chance to grow, and we can offer that to others. So I invite you to join me in this calling in culture, this calling in world that we're building. I think you will have a lot of joy and satisfaction in it, like I've found. We don't actually risk anything because all we risk losing is our pain. And then you'll learn the most powerful lesson I've learned from 5 decades of being a social justice activist. Fighting hate should be fun. It's being a hater that sucks. Thank y'all.
Great. Well, I hope you enjoyed that TED Talk. I was really fascinated by her viewpoints and actually by the 3 types of calling it out in or on. Something that had not occurred to me before, and that really made me reflect. So as we wait for some Q&As to come in, please keep posting your comments and questions following that, or anything that has occurred to you in the past or that you've witnessed, maybe, if you feel comfortable in doing so. I just wanted to, before we maybe hear from Graham and Samar, what they feel about microaggressions and sort of some tips or what they got out of that video. I just wanted to apologize for my wobbly start, and it's because for the first time in 2 years, I'm actually sitting in the same room as Chrissy and Samar after the whole pandemic. And so I'm a bit starstruck. I'm a little bit like, oh, real people apart from my own family. So do forgive me. So maybe if I go to Samar first, if we try and maybe think a little bit about what a microaggression is, what it looks like, what type of things are said. I think for me, the key point is that most of the time they're unintentional. and the perpetrator, in inverted commas, because it's not a particularly nice term, perpetrator, but the person who is sort of speaking the microaggression isn't intentionally doing so to hurt, but the connotations and some of the consequences of what they're saying can definitely be hurtful. And just before we open, today we're talking about specifically about racial microaggressions, but microaggressions can occur towards all minority groups and all people, really. But today we're, for the purposes of our Ethnicity and Maritime network, we're talking about specifically racial ones. So, Samar, what would you like to share with us today?
I think that's a good point, actually, Celia, because I was thinking about this earlier. Often people have different definitions for what a microaggression is, and that's, I think, part of the problem. A lot of the time, as you say, it's unintentional, and I guess it's a lot about thinking about the impact you have rather than the intention. So that's quite key. But for me, and I guess with my experience, it's usually it's like a line of questioning that can be quite persistent, or behaviour and actions that are sort of based solely upon my race, that make me feel a little uncomfortable, can be a bit hostile, but as you say, it can be completely unintentional. But it usually gives the effect of making the person feel like, you know, they don't belong, or othering is a good term, actually, just feeling like the other. That's, I think, what I would put as the definition.
Okay, thank you. Graham, can I come to you next?
Yes, you can. I'm just trying to play around with my screen so I can get questions up and also see people and things like that. So yeah, I mean, for me, this is not a strange one, but I think that the example that she gave wasn't really a microaggression. I think that was, you know, as she said outright, sort of bigotry by her Uncle Frank. And that's the sort of thing that people are more aware of. We try to do active bystander training, and that uses the 4Ds model, which I had to write it down because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's distract, delay, delegate, and be direct. And I was like almost trying to line them up with what she was talking about. You know, there's the calling somebody out, which is almost direct thing, and then calling on them is a little bit of, I would say, sort of delaying, almost delegating, but then yeah, there's the distracting as well, the calling them in, which is sort of almost distracting a little bit and starting that conversation. So yeah, I mean, examples of microaggressions, I think the most recent one I had was we've just had the chair of our Commonwealth network, or former chair, go off to Dartmouth to commission as an officer. She was a petty officer, she was a senior 8, and she's a black woman from the Caribbean. And she was talking to a senior officer and mentioned that she was going to Dartmouth to be RNC, and he asked if she would be working in stores there. And you know, and it's that sort of assumption, that to me is what I kind of think in the Navy sort of go through every day. There's that you know, death by 1,000 cuts. But at the moment, we don't particularly train or talk about it that much because we're trying to deal with bigger things, and we're looking at the more obvious things. So I think for us as an organization, microaggressions will come, and it's something that we're going to work into active bystanders. But at the moment, yeah, we're trying to deal with bigger problems, I think. And as you see, not necessarily on race, but the recent report into women in defence shows, you know, that within the military we do have some, you know, some bigger problems than microaggressions. And I think the day that we can get to the point where microaggressions are all we have to worry about, we'll be in a really good place. We still won't be in a good place, but we'll be in a better place. So we do talk about it, but we don't sort of actively train around it, apart from some sort of active bystander areas.
Thank you, Graham. Samar, what about you? Sort of, is there anything in particular that you've encountered or examples that you might feel comfortable sharing to give people more of an idea of sort of the different types of microaggressions? And also, I personally think that a lot of it comes also with body language and tone of voice, and microaggressions can be reinforced by a stance, a position, a look, and you know, a sort of harshness in the voice. And I agree with Graham. I mean, Uncle Frank didn't particularly strike me as just being a microaggressor, that he was, you know, quite overtly, albeit, you know, we could give him the benefit of the doubt of maybe not thinking of the consequences of what he said, or maybe, you know, trying to be a little bit lenient with him. But I agree that microaggressions are more used in our everyday language inadvertently, or they're things that maybe traditionally were used, you know, historically as, you know, comparisons or anecdotes or things like that, but actually, you know, are no longer acceptable nowadays. So, Tamar, I'll come back to you. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I had a few examples I was thinking about. I think the word microaggressions can be quite synonymous with black women's hair. I think that's one that people are quite familiar with. And they can be verbal or non-verbal. I've had people sort of grab my braids or put their hands in my hair without asking, which is obviously quite upsetting and a very strange experience. I've never done that to someone before in my life. But even asking can be quite upsetting, because it kind of makes you feel a bit like a pet. You know, can I pet your dog? Can I touch your hair? And it can be quite awkward when you say, actually no. Or, you know, a line of questioning about my hair, because, you know, I'll have extensions, or one day I'll change the colour, and what's happened? Is your hair that long? Is that your real hair? And it can be, as you say, the tone and just, yeah, the general vibe can be quite persistent and hostile. But a tip, I guess, I'm thinking about, if that ever happened to anybody, would be to sort of mirror them and say, can I touch your hair? And sometimes they think, oh, well, you know, that's a bit weird, why would you want to touch my hair? And then they realise that the question they've asked is a bit strange. Or just say no, you know, you're allowed to say no. And then other examples, another common one is, where are you from? Which I know Julie often talks about in our Ethnicity network sessions. I mean, I'm from Devon. I grew up there. I spent 2/3 of my life there. I went to school there. So when I think of home and where I'm from, I would say Devon. But often when I give that answer, people won't take it. They're not going to have that as the answer. And they'll say, no, where are you really from, really? And depending on how I'm feeling the day, I might say Wilcliffe Village, which is the village where my house is. And just, you know, refuse to go down that road. But sometimes it can be a bit more persistent, you know, were you born here? Do you have a British passport? Again, mirroring can help. Do you have a British passport? I've used that one before. But it just makes you feel like you're a foreigner in, you know, in your own country. You don't belong. And when they seem like small things, but when they happen again and again, that people are asking me the same question, it's like, oh, you know, do I really stick out that much? You know, am I that different? So yeah, I would say that. And then in terms of a non-verbal one, I was thinking about when I was younger and I lived in Devon, there was a bus that went every 2 hours from my village into town. And I would get on the bus, and usually it would be mostly full of elderly white people. And I could see visibly they'd be shocked to see me and just stare. And as more people got on the bus, they would avoid sitting next to me. And I mean, that happened quite a lot when I was younger, and I guess, yeah, kind of upsetting thinking about it now. And in terms of a tip or trick, I guess, if you ever see something like that happening on a bus and people aren't sitting next to a person, smile at them, or go and sit next to them, because, you know, what do they think is going to happen, really, you know? So yeah, there's a handful of examples of how they can manifest. That's helpful.
Yes. Oh, thank you for sharing. I just wanted to pick up on the element of, you know, sort of that cumulative effect of, you know, of feeling as if you're a target, which actually brings you more and more into that exclusion zone, you know, or the sort of you don't belong zone. And it reminds me of two things. So there's an interesting fact that I learned when I was initially looking into unconscious bias and the scientific reasons for unconscious bias. And actually, our brain processes pain in the same part that deals with the feelings of exclusion. So if we just think about that and we think how painful psychologically and the effects on our mental health or someone else's mental health when that the sort of, it's not just a one-off comment, but it's a continued questioning of your identity, of your sense of belonging, of your aspects about you, which I find incredibly, they're really personal, but they're also sacrosanct. And there was someone recently shared with me a video of sort of a brilliant way of depicting microaggressions as mosquito bites. So if you think of a mosquito bite, the one-off, you sort of slap it or scratch it, and it's a bother, but that's it. But if you're constantly subjected to a stream of them, then then it's a much bigger problem and a much bigger issue. And sometimes, in the cases of challenges to your sense of to your belonging or to your identity, will make you question yourself, and will well, what are they trying to say? And do I really? Oh, maybe I don't belong, or maybe I don't sound English enough, or etc. I've personally had I've had the "where are you from" one as well, and really "where are you from?" And by then you've lost the patience to actually call them in or on. And I guess to the audience, we'll come to some questions in a minute, but I guess to the audience, how do you think we should tackle the sort of when it's persistent? How can we still be graceful enough, as a professor was talking about, in calling upon someone or calling them in, and so inviting that conversation? Because I do like that idea of not being confrontational and aggressive, but actually when we've already been hurt multiple times, that day or that week or in that month, how can we still sort of take a deep breath and pull ourselves together and be graceful enough to try and have that conversation? So I'd like to invite the audience to maybe reflect upon that. But one of the other things to me is they're called microaggressions, but they really have a macro effect. And I'd like to really highlight how, some things, we don't know things about people, and very often we'll just say something. And there's so many layers and cultural nuances to who we are and people's identity, and something could really be cutting. So to give you another example, I've had someone comment, "Oh, Cecilia, that's not really a black name, is it?" And as it happens, they obviously didn't know, but I was adopted into a white family. And so actually growing up in 1970s Italy, where it wasn't very common to be of colour, and certainly not to be of colour in a sort of white household, that immediately it's not a very black name, displaced me. And really made me feel, okay, so actually, where does that fit in? And why should I have a black name? Because personally, growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood and in a white family, I didn't ever think of my color until someone pointed it out. And I think that's one of the sad things. Very often we're quite happy being ourselves as individuals until someone makes us not. I just wanted to, before we have a look at some of the questions, Graham, did you want to add anything, or do you have tips maybe that you have discussed?
Well, I think not so much tips, but for me as a white man, I find that I always ask myself the question, if I'm thinking something, I want to ask somebody a question because I'm interested, for instance, in people's backgrounds and things like that. I sort of question how well I know that person, if it's the right time to ask or something. So recently, I just found out a team member of mine who I worked with 5 years ago, and I've known for quite a long time, that her mother's Ethiopian. So I knew she was biracial, but I obviously didn't know much about her background. But I've always been interested. We'd never been in the right place to ask that question without it seeming like, you know, it could have come across as a microaggression. So I think you just almost have to sort of take a pause and think, what, you know, why and what effect will this have? Will it make that person think, you know, I'm asking you because I think you are different? You know, is that ultimately the reason why you're asking? Or is it because you are genuinely interested? And in that case, they'll probably share it eventually. You know, there was no rush for me to find out, and it was really interesting. I had a really interesting, you know, fascinating conversation when she did share it. But yeah, so it's almost like asking yourself, you know, what effect is this going to have? What, you know, those words are powerful things. And I always use the example in the military, we're quite good at apologizing when we do things wrong. You know, if we get something wrong and we hurt people we weren't supposed to, then we're really good at apologizing. And, you know, if necessary, paying compensation or, you know, doing as much as we can to repair that damage. We're not so good with our words when we do it. And people tend to double down with the, oh, I didn't mean it like that, you know, that wasn't my intent. So I think, yeah, it's also as well, if you do make a mistake or you do unintentionally say something, then just be ready to apologize, you know, and actually really mean it, because you can't go through life without offending people sometimes and without making mistakes. And I thought that idea of, can anybody think, when on the video, where it was said, you know, has anybody not made a mistake in their life? You know, we've all done things that we aren't proud of at times, and actually just, yeah, owning that and actually being responsible and saying, yeah, I'm sorry, you know, I honestly didn't mean that. How can I move past this? What can I do? That sort of thing. I think just, yeah, being open to challenge and being open to you know, apologizing.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. Absolutely, and I think there's two sides, isn't there? There's the humility of asking the question, and you know, and the curiosity actually of asking the question, in a you know, in an authentic and genuine manner, so it's received correctly, and then actually the humility of apologizing, as you say, you know, if you've got it wrong, and I think especially because the majority of the time these are unintentional and they're not, there's no ill harm meant. The people that I've called in are usually called out and mortified, you know, because they didn't realize actually the weight or the consequence of their words. So I completely agree with you that if, you know, if we get it wrong, which we will, it's just really important to apologize. And I think after that there can be a conversation. So actually, if that initial exchange, albeit awkward, occurs, following that, I think that might be a good opener for a conversation. You know, well, do you know that actually when you said this, it meant this, or it has historical connotations, or things like that? I think is maybe a good way of inviting a conversation and an educational piece on both parties, I believe. So should we go and have a look at some questions? Bear with us because there's loads flooding in, which is always great. Wow. How to tackle these.
So we've definitely got lots and lots of great comments coming in here, which is absolutely fabulous. I think the last points actually really, they're all really fabulous ones. But if we look at Faith's comment, that I think the notion of calling it in is fine. However, how realistic is it that people are going to have patience to continually educate those who transgress? I think that microaggressions should be part of training if an organisation is going to tackle diversity and racism in the workplace. I think that's a really, really fabulous point.
Yeah.
Cecilia, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Faith, for making that comment, and I completely agree. And I guess it comes back a little bit to you know, what we initiated earlier, as in how do we keep being patient? And actually, if we've been you know, mosquito bitten multiple times, how do we then not lash out? You know, how do we then not, you know, lose our gracefulness and call it out? But I completely agree. And actually, one of the ways of introducing it, maybe into the workforce, as you say, is via training. But I think when we're looking at racism, there's quite a few conversations at the moment going on, and certainly following George Floyd's death, to do with that it's not enough any longer to say I'm not racist, but it's to overtly say I am anti-racist. And I think with that comes the discussion about taking a knee, or certainly to institutions and companies, I would say, well, that's great that you're not racist, but what are you doing to not be racist? You know, what systems have you got in place? What policies have you got in place? What open conversations have you started having with your colleagues and teammates and line managers? And are they aware of the fact that for you it's not enough to say I'm not racist, but you need to actually now start demonstrating that what you say is true. So it's very much, you know, we need to sort of push and challenge from, you know, moving on from talking the talk and not walking it. You know, I think it's really important that the sort of two there isn't such a divide between them, because I think a lot of companies sort of might feel that it's sufficient to just say it, and I don't mean that they might not believe it, but saying it needs to be felt and lived and breathed within the company's DNA, and every single person needs to be held accountable. And I think we've often had discussions in the network about accountability, and certainly at management level, to have visible leadership that shows what behaviors, you know, and demonstrates what it is that we're asking of people. But actually, speaking from, you know, myself as a person who is incredibly passionate about this, as you can imagine, I can talk to this until I'm blue in the face, but actually if people don't want to be held accountable for their own change in behavior, then we won't see any traction. So I think it's about ensuring that people understand the notion, the effect, and what can they do. So what golden nuggets are we providing people? How are we helping them to actually say, oh, okay, I see how this fits in, or I see how maybe my behavior has not been inclusive, or I've transgressed, or I've said the wrong thing, and I'm going to take stock of that. So it's very much, I guess, a request that we need to give, you know, to ask people of themselves, rather than you know, always pointing the finger. I'm very much for calling it in, out, or on, but it's very, for me, it's also very much about looking at yourself in the mirror and seeing how your behaviours could be more inclusive. Samad, do you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
I was actually thinking on the other side of the coin. I guess it was interesting from that TED talk, what the lady was saying about you need to make sure you're in a place of healing, make sure that you're, I guess, strong enough to be able to respond to these sorts of microaggressions, and I think that is quite key. I also thought having a strong sense of self-identity is quite helpful, because it will sort of increase your confidence and competence when it comes to sort of dealing with these situations, having sort of clear and concise answers, because you know in yourself, you know, what's being said is perhaps not, you know, right. And education as well, which works on both sides of the coin, really. I brought my book along today, Overcoming Everyday Racism by Susan Collins, which is a fantastic book, which was really helpful for me, but also I can see the other side of the coin also could be helpful. Just sort of educating yourself about, you know, examples of microaggressions and tips as well, and how to deal with them is really key. Yeah, reading books on race and ethnicity has really helped me anyway in feeling a bit more healed and what she was saying about being calm and collected in responding to those things. Because when, in the instances where I have been calm, and I guess coming from a place of love, it has been a more pleasant experience for me as well as the other person, making it less awkward and, you know, sort of making it clear that there's no repercussions here. You know, made a bit of a blip, but we can move past it, and I'm not going to hold it against you, and we just move on. So, yeah, from the other side of the coin, that's quite helpful.
Thank you as well. And I guess, Graham, sort of you're in the network as a true ally. You were saying, you're white male. What would you say to all the allies out there? Because I think actually we very often forget the power of allyship, and we talk about allyship an awful lot across all of the diversity of maritime networks, and how important it is for for people to not view a problem as in it's only for that group. So people of colour or Indigenous people or people from an ethnic minority. Well, it's their problem to fit in, or people from the LGBT community or women if that's a minority. So whichever the minority, or people with disabilities. Let's maybe and we'd love to sort of hear also from the audience, as an ally to racism, I guess, as an ally to anti-racism, what do you think some sort of impactful steps could be, and how do you see your role as an ally in this educational piece that Samar was talking about?
I think it's something where, for me especially, I looked at Tracy's comments, so I've got that in my head at the moment, or a question, but that's the sort of thing where, as a bystander, for me, I now step in, and I never used to, and I think we discussed this actually at one of our previous meetings, but I step in now because something offends me, not because I think it's offended somebody else. If somebody in a group that I'm in or somewhere where I am is being racist or is doing something which, it could be a microaggression or something, that annoys me. That's something that, gets on my nerves and offends me. So that's why I would step in on that front, and I would say, I'm not happy with that. Not, oh, I don't think that person is happy because you said this, and I wouldn't do that on their behalf. If obviously they were struggling, and I recognize that white saviorism, I don't want to come across as that, but yeah, clearly I would help them out. But it's more because, that has broke my moral code, if I'm honest. So that's the sort of thing why I was recently thinking about going to a football game, and I'd heard that the team that I support, there'd been some booing of people taking the knee. And I thought, if I go to that game, how will I react with that? And in the end, I couldn't make it, but I thought, actually, do you know what? I'd have to say something. I couldn't not say something, because that really, that really offends me. And when football players have been so clear on why they're doing it, not supporting any group or any political reason, they're doing it. It's an anti-racist statement. It's something that they're doing. So that's a sort of thing where, I would step in because it offends me, not because it offends anybody from a certain group in a protected characteristic. At the same time, I feel I've just been lost because my doorbell's just gone. I'm really sorry. Sort of lost my train of thought. But I think I'm going to stop right there because I've completely lost where I was. Do you want to ask me the question again, because I think I answered a different one?
No, to be honest, I think you captured it brilliantly, and Tracy's comment was really good, and actually one that came up in one of our network meetings about, what do you do if you're the bystander and you find yourself in a situation where maybe the person who's on the receiving end hasn't responded. But I think your stance on this and your viewpoint is incredibly valid. I think you have, as a bystander, you have absolutely every right to call someone out in or on because it matters to your set of values. You know, it has touched the core of something that for you isn't right. And that's the initial response. You're not necessarily just defending the other person or implying that the other person is incapable of doing so themselves, but it has, you know, upset something within your, you know, moral and ethical code and your set of values. So I think, you know, that's a really good way of looking at it. And I was thinking about if the other person then, you know, calls you out and says, well, why did you do that? Because I could have answered by myself. That's a really good answer. It's, you know, more than anything, you know, I wasn't necessarily trying to defend you. I actually was upset by that. And the reasons behind that could be multiple. You know, whether you have someone of that, you know, on the receiving end, you know, who is of that group. You know, you don't know why someone feels particularly strong about something. But I think in our attempt to also have conversations and keep the conversation going, it's, you know, that's also maybe something that can help in saying, do you know, actually, I wasn't necessarily, you know, trying to be the knight in shining armor. I was actually, you know, really offended because X, Y, Z. And then actually the conversation can still move past that sort of awkward spot. Samar, what do you think about sort of that? Or has anyone ever sort of come on their white horse and tried to save you?
Well, I was just thinking that. I was trying to rack my brain. It's never happened. No one has ever stepped forward and said anything. And I think if it did happen, I'd be overjoyed. Think, wow, someone else saw what was happening, and I don't have to have the awkwardness of calling it in or out. Someone's helping me and supporting me in this. I would be really thankful. I would, welcome anyone to do that.
As a super ally to all of our networks. What's your viewpoint?
Absolutely. I was actually been thinking about it as well, and I'd love to say, and I hope that if I was ever in the position of being a bystander, that I would always want to ensure first the person's okay, and I feel comfortable for me to actually call it out. Because what I also don't want to do is make the assumption that they do want me to do that. I want to stand shoulder to shoulder, and I want to be a strong ally. I want to listen, I want to learn. But I also do hope that I would have the courage to do that. I think so often as allies, we want to listen and we should listen, but sometimes we're not quite sure what our place can be. And certainly through these networks, we're having these conversations more and more. And I'll certainly say, Heather, I'm not perfect. But my absolute aim and passion is to ensure that everybody feels comfortable and secure in the workplace, that they can be their authentic self if they wish to be their authentic self, or they can be comfortable to be them, and there aren't these barriers in place. So yes, I hope as an ally, as a bystander, I'll listen, I'll protect you, but importantly, I will stand shoulder to shoulder with you throughout.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to, maybe I'll turn to Graham first. Just thinking about, I guess, you know, the stronger or wider effects on, you know, on someone's mental health and well-being. I think we talk about this a lot. It's now in the limelight and the spotlight, certainly in our industry. But again, it's something that has come and weaved its way through all of our networks. How, you know, the division caused by, you know, being excluded, you know, or made not to be a part of something. How that impacts on mental health, and how can we maybe ask businesses to think of that link? So think of the sort of divisive nature of what it's like to not have an inclusive culture, and to really highlight how that affects individuals, and I guess from a commercial and financial point of view, it makes a difference to people's absenteeism, and how long, or if people go off sick. But more importantly, because those are sort of procedural things that from a company's point of view they want to prevent. But actually, how do we engage more with companies to not make it necessarily a sort of factual element, and really link a culture of belonging to someone's mental health and well-being, and how happy they are at work surely makes a difference, as Chrissy was saying, how you're able to be your authentic self. You're unburdened. You have no concerns about pretending to be someone, or not saying something, or not going to an office event because of what people might think, if of your partner, of your the fact that you come by yourself, or whatever those elements are. But I think let's think about what recommendation could we make to businesses to make that link really tangible and to help them.
I think so. I've been wrestling with this idea in a sort of almost in an academic way. We're reviewing leadership doctrine within the Royal Navy, and we've been asked for the D&I team's sort of views on leadership, which is good that they're including us in the conversation, but also annoyed me a little bit because they're looking at D&I as almost as like a bolt on, as something that you do when there's an issue. That really annoys me. So I went off and I read a lot on inclusive leadership, and that idea of, I think I drew a little diagram in the sort of X and Y axis. On one side was feeling that you belong to the team, and on the other side was feeling that you belong as an individual. And in the sort of top right quadrant is to me inclusiveness. So that's the idea that you are fully part of the team, but also that you're respected as an individual. And that's kind of the lens that I look through things when I'm making leadership decisions within my team. I ask myself, how will that make the members of my team feel ultimately? It can be as simple as that. I think obviously there's something to be said for supporting teammates as well, and for supporting your colleagues. But I think for me, especially within the military, it's leadership that matters. They're the ones who set the example, and we are the ones who sort of show people what we value. So if I value if I know something's happened to a team member and I value their mental health, and I'm willing to take on extra work, I'm willing to change things to make it easy for that person. And in a recent example of this not working was, I spoke to an Asian member of the Royal Marines recently who had been racially abused at a train station in the southwest, and had then gone to work the next day and had obviously been visibly upset, and was almost told that just suck it up and get on with it. You almost bringing the place down, and it was a clear lack of empathy on the leadership of that unit's part. So yeah, when I looked at how do you make teams more inclusive, I sat there and I thought, well, when have I not felt included, and what did bad leadership look like, and then how do we sort of reverse engineer that to get what would have made that better? And I think if you're constantly asking yourself those questions, what is this decision, what effect is it going to have on my team, or my colleague is going through something, how can I support? I think if you keep that foremost, it's not easy, by no means the imagination, but no stretch of the imagination, but that's the way I approach it. And I'm not saying I'm still learning as I go, and constantly learning. But yeah, it seems to be working within the team that I work in right now. And we are the D&I team, so obviously everybody's great, and we put that first always. But we're still a military unit, and we still have operational output to achieve and things like that. So if it can work for us, I don't see why it can't work for units at sea or deployed on operations and things like that.
Great, thanks, Graham. And Samar, what about you? What do you think your recommendations would be to the sort of businesses that maybe think, well, how do we approach this? Where do we start?
So that was really well said, Graham. I echo your points. It's a really tricky question. I was thinking about it from the point of view of what would happen if we didn't really acknowledge these sorts of things in mental health. put importance on it, it would affect productivity of that person or people in particular if they feel as though it's not an inclusive environment or they're not really in a safe space when they come to work. And I guess then that company could have the repercussions of being known for that sort of culture, and having if that's known in the industry, then you're going to have less diverse people wanting to work there. Less diversity is also then negative on the company in that way. So it will sort of have a knock-on effect, really. But I think you're right, Graham. Supporting people in your team and making sure they're aware that there's an importance being placed on mental health and all of these things, microaggressions and everything. It will be taken seriously, I think. It's key.
Thank you. Yes. So someone asked a question, do you have any advice for allies in the workplace who see microaggressions and are unsure how to stand up against them? And hopefully we've covered that.
I have a good response. Sorry, I just remembered.
Yes. Oh, please. No, please do.
Quite similar to the lady who was talking on the TED Talk about. It's an interesting viewpoint. I sometimes say, "What do you mean by that?" Which you can change your tone as, I guess, calling in or calling out will change. If you change the tone, it will change how the effect it will have. But just asking, "Oh, what do you mean by that?" Because often the things they say, they're not really thinking before they speak. And if you say, "What do you mean by that?" you're sort of highlighting, "Oh, that was a bit strange. Do you want to go more into that?" And then they'll sort of sometimes think, "Oh, actually," as the lady was saying, sort of backtrack a bit and say, "Oh, no, and I don't know what I mean." So that can be quite a simple response that works in quite a broad range of microaggressions.
Yeah, great. And the next one from Faith. Husband works for a company that responded to the George Floyd incident by being very proactive in tackling the issues. The problem is that some of his white colleagues felt that they were being accused of racism and they didn't see it as an opportunity to learn and grow. How do you combat that reaction? Good question, Faith. Good question. I think we've probably all come across that, I think maybe in some degree or another. Certainly when the incident occurred in our company, there were lots of discussions around white privilege and what does that look like, and it should be all lives matter, and those type of discussions. But I think from my perspective, it's about actually having that debate, and it's a topic which will be very close to people's hearts for different reasons, and probably both sides of the coin have what in their eyes is a valid argument, but actually laying cards on the table and trying to find common ground, or trying to find something which is a positive element in a discussion, I think is also really important. But in the case of our company, there was so much around what is white privilege. Let's have a look at that and ask people questions such as, have you ever refused entry to somewhere because of your skin color, or have you ever been separated or been told that you don't belong or excluded in any way? And I think it's what really does strike me is how sometimes words surface and the media likes to use big terminology which a lot of people don't understand, and sometimes it's really taking yourself back to basics to try and set a scenario. And I always think it's, if you use a real life example or something that people can relate to more, it makes it easier to explain. And I feel that, albeit, lots of people would have incurred hardship, and lots of people have, whether they are ethnic minority background or not. However, for me, it strikes me that well, in that particular instance, following George Floyd's death, how many people would have felt that actually, or have felt that their lives don't matter, not just about all life, how insignificant have you been made to feel, or a friend of mine, son in London gets stopped and searched on a regular basis. And there are things like that I think people need to hear more, and need to understand what it is like for the person who is on the receiving end. And again, it comes back to that regularity of things. So how many times have you been exposed to X, Y, Z? Or do you realize that, for some people, this is an everyday occurrence or every weekly occurrence? And I think then you really start to understand what privilege means. Privilege doesn't mean that you are, royal or of the nobility or live in an amazing part of town. It just means that you have not had that particular experience. And for me, it's about opening and broadening the views as to help people and educate people and say, just because you haven't experienced it, it doesn't mean it doesn't occur. And turning a blind eye or saying, oh, I'm not racist, or yes, but that's not really white privilege, and dismissing things is equally damaging, and all it does is reinforce barriers and stereotypes. So that's my view. Graham, what do you feel?
I think so. Last week we had a talk amongst quite a few people, and I was talking about different definitions of racism, and looking at dictionary definition versus anti-racism definition, things like that. Because one thing I noticed was talking to people in certain positions about anti-racism, they actually didn't know what it was. And at one point, when I drafted a paper about an anti-racist organization, the first comment on it from a senior officer was, I don't like the term anti, it sounds very negative. Can we not change this? So I thought, right, we'll go back to basics and we'll just have a discussion about racism and what that is. And I never once mentioned the words white privilege, because I think within the Royal Navy, especially within massively within our ratings card, we get a lot of people from low socioeconomic background, and that turns them off straight away. So what I looked at was disparities, disparities in crime, disparities in healthcare, disparities in education, and then had a follow-up question the next day. Oh, when you're talking about white privilege, what is, I just wanted to ask this question, and I thought, so obviously that person got it, but I think through the media they've almost come to recognise the two things, and that's sort of not so much how I get around that idea, but I tend not to use those terms because I come from quite a poor family, I'll say, not so much a poor background, but a poor family, so I recognise that, for instance, my cousin who's unemployed, whose daughter's just got expelled from school, would question that idea of having privilege, but what they can't do is ignore the data that shows that if they had to go to hospital with COVID, they would have a better chance of survival. If he was arrested for a crime, he would get a lesser sentence on average. His daughter, although she's obviously got into some trouble at school, has a much lower chance of being expelled or being excluded, just based on ethnicity. So those, I think they're the things that people can't argue with, and that's how I try and have that conversation, is around, these are the facts. You can't really ignore these facts. And ultimately, if you want to call it white privilege, call it white privilege. You could just say that there's been more opportunity, and more access to opportunity. And I also normally tend to start off with a little bit about my background, because I can then say, if this is sort of idea that I can understand, then surely anybody can understand it. It's quite hard to argue against those cold hard facts that people do, and I won't say that nobody ever will. And that there's also that idea as well, just mentioning the question about if you accept that you want to be an anti-racist, or your organization is going to become anti-racist, you're almost accepting the fact that in the past you have been racist, or your organization has possibly been racist. That's something that leaders are scared of, I know, especially in government and military organizations, I'll say. And it's something that, you know, people are uncomfortable with, but ultimately, it's, you know, it's not something. When I volunteered for this job, it wasn't for a comfortable life. It wasn't, you know, to go into rooms and talk to people and feel nice and about myself. It was to challenge myself and to recognize that actually, you know, there's no growth without pain, and you can't move forward and learn unless you sort of, you know, think, actually, you know, when I was out with my friends, and I said something, you know, my black friend probably found that offensive but didn't say anything to me, or that sort of thing. And it's constantly challenging yourself. How you win people over, I'd say there are two approaches, and we've probably looked at them here, which is, you know, the sort of the hard approach and the direct challenge, or there's a sort of softly. And I think that's situational, really. It's the best one at a time, and it's also a measured approach. So we recently had a discussion about a zero tolerance approach to racism, which sounds great, but actually in practice is quite hard to do, because how do you measure that? If somebody, like we said earlier, makes a mistake and it's an honest mistake, offense wasn't intended, but has been racist, you know, do you apply that massive hammer with the zero tolerance approach, or do you go for a more nuanced sort of approach? So that's something where having sort of almost mandatory things could be unhelpful, I suppose. And then you become the D&I police, and you're going around, you know, and people just lock their doors and they don't want to talk to you because they're scared that they're going to get in trouble if they say something wrong. So yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, and I'm not, you know, and I definitely haven't found the perfect recipe, but I think it's very situational, and it's knowing your team ultimately, and knowing the people, and how you can actually bring them to the table and talk. And I'll be honest, that talk that we had last week went out to about 300 people, and about 30 turned up. So immediately when people saw the title, you know, what is racism, you know, 90% of people just switched off. So yeah, it's hard to make people understand why, if this isn't something that's affecting them. And I see this in D&I all the time, you know, especially for the straight white male brigade, that D&I isn't our problem. It's something that, you know, that's their problem. It doesn't affect us, therefore it's not our problem. And I think also there's a bit of a realization that we'll eventually have to give something up. You know, if I'm looking at promotions and things like that, and my organization is saying, oh, you know, actually we're not reflecting society in our senior ranks, there should be more women, there should be more people of color in those ranks, then that to somebody who's a white man says, actually that's less opportunity for me. So again, that's a difficult conversation to have, but I think an honest one. And you have to say, do you want to work in a company where you get promoted or recognized on effort and ability, or, you know, on the fact that you come from a certain demographic? And I certainly don't want to work in that company where I have to question why I was put in a place. You know, is it because I'm good, or is it actually because I look like the person who put me here? So I think that is quite a difficult conversation to have, but one that definitely needs to be had.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, you make some very valid points, and you know, Faith has rightly put in the chat that actually sometimes the term, you know, white privilege in this instance that we're talking about, you know, is something that triggers. But as you say, you know, racism could also be a term that, you know, people shy away from, and things like that. And I mean, I wholeheartedly agree that, you know, being in D&I is not a walk in the park, and I think, as you know, it's also very fluid, so it's very subject to you know, social, political, economic, historical incidents, but I still feel very strongly about, you know, talking about it, and you know, maybe the next time you know, there's not 30 people that turn up, there might be 50. You know, and it's really chipping away slowly, and not giving up on those conversations because some people don't feel comfortable with them, or sort of say, well, it's not my problem, or you know, I can't see it, so it doesn't affect me. Because I think, you know, ultimately, yes, you know, do we want to, as you say, you know, do you want to, and it's convincing leaders, isn't it? Do they want a company which can best serve the people that it serves? And in order to have that, then you need that diversity, because you'll have so much knowledge about different people's lived experiences that you'll be able to serve best. And I genuinely, I started in D&I thinking this is going to be K2, it's going to be a challenge, but I've come to, it's my Everest. It's definitely Everest, and but at the same time, we're making progress, and the fact that we are having these conversations, and that we have, these amazing diversity maritime networks, and that people are joining the conversation, that people are sharing their opinions and best practice, is actually a big thing. And I think we need to keep celebrating the small wins, and that, that will have a ripple effect. And the industry that we're in has, historically been very white and male, and Rome was definitely not built in a day. So we've got a lot of work to do, and change doesn't happen, and we don't want flash change, because flash change doesn't work. And we're not about ticking boxes. We're properly about embedding it, and it's got to be small drips that help the industry, that promote collaboration and sharing of best practice, that will get us ultimately to where we are. Samar, did you want to add anything else on to sort of the the topic? But I think also, share what do you feel are the sort of next steps forward?
Okay, yeah. Well, I was just thinking about Faith's comment. Took me back to last summer after George Floyd's death, and I noticed the conversations I was having with friends were noticeably different when that friend was aware of white privilege and what it meant or wasn't. And you're right, the term does trigger people if people don't understand it. White fragility too, actually, and I've forgotten the name of the author of that book, but White Fragility is a great book that I read last summer. But I think in tackling those conversations, I tried, after reading White Fragility, I tried to put myself in their shoes of what, where this defensiveness was coming from and what it felt like to be called out. And it took a while, but once I was in a space where I'd done my healing and I was able to, as that lady said, sort of take on someone else's feelings, I could do the softly approach. And I did find that was more, well, it worked, because if you get stuck at the defensiveness stage, there's no going forward. And because they're my friends and I love them, I was able to come with it to compassion and love. And I also put myself, I sort of highlighted my privilege in sort of raising topics like colorism, and use examples of when, I've been called out for things I've said or done, and say, it's horrible, it's not nice, but I'm so glad that they did, because now going forward, I act differently, and, I've bettered myself in my education so that, I can make people who are less privileged than me feel comfortable in spaces. So, but it's really, can be really tricky, especially after it just happened. Emotion is rife, and it's hard to take the softly calm approach, but I've mastered it now anyway, and made a change in my sphere anyway.
Do you mind if I just interject?
Not at all.
So what you just said really it took me back to one of our network sessions that we had last year. And obviously, I'm going to put you on the spot, but as the brainchild of the book club, which is fabulous, can you talk us through your thinking about why the book club and how the dialogues progressed? I do apologise for keeping you on the spot.
No, that's okay, yes. So it was after George Floyd's murder last year that I was sort of feeling a lot of feelings, and feeling a bit helpless, actually, and just thinking, God, racism is awful. What can I do to make a change? And I approached Chrissy and Julie with the idea of doing an anti-racist book club. We didn't actually call it that. Again, it's about titles, Graham. I think that would put people off, but a book club for the Ethnicity network. guess it was just a safe space for people to be able to talk and from both sides of the coin and to learn. And it's interesting talking about triggers. Our first book, I think, our second book was Rennie Edo-Lodge's Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and that really, did split the group a bit on the title. And even in my own home, actually, my dad, who's Ghanaian, he hated the title. He thought, you're really going to, turn people off with that title. Why can't it just be something nice so people pick up the book? Which really sparked quite a big debate. But it's been interesting. We've had some regulars at the book club, and it's been really lovely actually to watch people learn and grow and become more. I had somebody say, I feel more open-minded about this topic about race and racism, and that's just so rewarding. And I've met you guys as well, and Graham, who often comes as well. So it's just, been such a positive experience. It came out of something negative, and it's a tiny bit of change, but I like to think that the people who learned stuff at that book club will then go on into their sphere and change people's opinions and become more open-minded, that sort of thing. So, answer your question. I can't remember what the question was.
You did, thank you. And I don't say from the book club, it's opened my eyes a lot. Certainly some of the books that have been brought to book club are not necessarily books I would have thought to read. And what's been lovely, and the way yourself and Julie have set it up, is that if you haven't read the book, it's okay, or if you haven't quite finished it, because we all know life gets in the way. I've got 2 small children, and I'd love to say that I have full time to read. I don't with working. Poor excuse, I know. But what was really great was I was almost at the end, and I thought I knew how I was going to feel after the end of one of the books. Came into the book club, and my whole thinking was actually challenged on it. So when I then went back, I went with a whole different lens. I went, oh, okay, this is quite interesting. So personally, I'm very grateful to you for really kind of leading this discussion, and we'll absolutely put a link up to our next book club in the chat afterwards. I do apologise, we've just had a message come through that we've got a few sound issues. Which I don't think there's much we can do about that, and I do apologise. It's the joy of virtual, but if anybody has missed anything, please do let me know. Hopefully when we put the recording out, we'll be able to fix some of the sound in the post, but if not, I do apologise for anyone that's having difficulty hearing us today.
Oh, Robin DiAngelo, yes, thank you, Graham. That's the author of White Fragility. Great book.
Does anybody in the virtual ether have any more questions or things that you would like to ask us, and hopefully we can answer them, or things that you've particularly that you'd like a specific takeaway from the session from us? I think the aim of this session, like all of our network meetings, is hopefully to give you something for your toolkit, so for everyone to go back and maybe have a think and take something back into your world and make small changes, or certainly at least just think about some of the things that maybe you've heard or discussed, or the TED Talk even, and pass it on if you feel it's been relevant, or if some of the things that you've heard have triggered some ideas, and you think you can you can bring those to the table in your organizations. We'd really love you to be able to do so, and absolutely, if you're free, do join our network meetings so that we can also address topics that are relevant to you. As we've always said, that this network is your network, so it's really important that we discuss things that people feel are relevant to them and to your industries. we've just had a question come in. What are your top tips for cultivating an environment of intersectionality? And do you have examples from your careers so far? Okay, great question. For me, so the word itself, intersectionality, for me goes up there with the sort of white privilege and the racism, because I think very often it's used a lot, not necessarily always understood, and seen as problematic. So I think I'm going to ask Graham first about your views on this, and then I'll go to Samar, and I'll sit quietly and listen, which should be my role. And I tend to get really passionate about things and start talking about everything. But over to you, Graham.
Yeah, put me on the spot here. So the no, for us, I mean, the two things for us are recognize within our organization that we have a very small number of women, first of all. When I'm thinking about intersectionality, I always go straight to to women of color. Ultimately, the zenith, if you want to say, of intersectionality. But and then we have a very small number of ethnic minorities as well. So if you are in the Royal Navy and you're an ethnic minority woman, then you are a minority within a minority. And this for me was kind of highlighted recently when we did a bit on the Women's Royal Imperial Naval Service, the RINS they were called. They operated in India during the Second World War. And we had an interview with an officer who was an Indian woman in the Navy, or a woman of Indian heritage. And I was asked for some statistics on how many women we had. And I said, I can't give those away because it would basically ultimately break an anonymity code sort of thing. So, it was less than 10. And that, really drove it home to these, when you start looking at intersectionality, you start to look at, groups within groups, and how there's that almost multiplying factor of, discrimination in certain ways and things like that, and especially in a very male dominant environment like the military. I think, that it's something that my friend actually, who I was talking about earlier, she leads on our gender desk, and we have quite a lot of conversations about how the things that we're looking at affect the groups that we're looking at as well, because you can never forget that there's not just a group of people here and then a group of people here. That intersectionality can multiply those effects. So that's kind of, for me, it's just something that has to be constantly at the front of my mind when I'm looking at things. And I'm quite lucky in that I've got quite a good support group for hammering that home to me, people who will challenge me and people who will remind me constantly. If I was ever in a case where I may forget about how people can suffer twice over from policies that aren't great, to certain protected characteristics, that I've got a really good support network who will constantly challenge me and constantly ask questions of me. So for me, as speaking as a white man, I need that support network. I don't have that lived experience of for instance, being a black woman. So I need people to inform me, to educate me, and to constantly tell me what their lives are like on a day-to-day basis, and how the policies that we're looking at, and the schemes and things that we have running, how they can help or how they can hinder.
Thank you, Graham. Samar.
Tricky question.
It is a tricky question.
I'm trying to think about it. I guess often when people say diversity and inclusion, or let's get more diversity in this, they're thinking about getting a woman on a panel, speaking panel or something, and in their minds, if we get a woman, then that's good enough. But they don't go a step further and think, okay, what about a black woman, or another intersectionality group. When I was last job hunting, for the first time, I asked recruiters about whether the company was diverse, and often the response would be, "Oh yes, the stats they've got, a lot of women working there." And I think, gosh, it's so interesting that you just assume that's why I'm asking, actually. And then, depending on how comfortable I'd feel, I say, actually, I was also wondering about X, Y, and Z, other marginalised groups, do they exist in this organisation? So perhaps sometimes it's about just a reminder. Someone says, "Oh, we've got this woman on the panel." Right, who is it? And maybe hinting at the idea of perhaps getting somebody else in who is a bit more diverse, or have we thought about the other groups that we could be representing? I think it's just a reminder in the workplace that to not just go to the go-tos, to think about other groups as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Another thing that was sort of sprung to mind was instigating and sort of setting up employee resource groups. I think is always a really good good starting point. And I think sometimes companies are a little bit fearful of these groups because they think that there's going to be a lot of output and they're going to have to sort of invest and change lots of things and sort of spend money on equipment and things like that. But actually, very often, people's lived experiences can highlight things that are huge for them and really don't take much effort from a company's perspective. It's things like looking at accessibility of your buildings. Do you have braille? Do you have handrails where there's no easy access? Do you have ramps? But I think also things like someone recently. So we have employee resource groups, and there is so much that I think had never occurred to us in terms of being inclusive. So we're now looking at rooms, especially in the new offices that we're sourcing, that we're just going to call quiet rooms. So whether they're for prayer, whether they're for breastfeeding, whether they're for insulin, for diabetics, or just for people with panic attacks, phobias, etc., etc. And if you start to think of what diversity is, the reason why it's so scary is because it is enormous, and people's lived experiences are so incredibly different and vast. And there is also something very specific to someone's lived experience. And for example, Samar and I are both people of colour, but our lived experience and our backgrounds and could be completely, in fact, probably are very, very different. So just because we're part of a group, the AIM or minority ethnic, it doesn't mean that we've experienced life in the same way, or our sort of values have been ever challenged in the same way, or our identity has ever been challenged in the same way. And I think things that employee resource groups can do is really bring to light also intersectionality. What does it mean that you are part of, our network for disability is called Work Without Limits. And let's not forget that disabilities are visible and invisible. So what happens if you are in that intersection of multiple sort of elements? How many extra layers and how many extra hoops do you just have to jump through just in your everyday life? And I think it's bringing those things to the forefront and talking to companies. When you restock your first aid kits, if you have a fridge, can you get some emergency insulin? I think there's a specific type for diabetics for an emergency situation, and all you need is a fridge to store that in. So it's just asking questions such as, have we contemplated? And sometimes I think it's very tricky because we don't have the data, and people haven't necessarily disclosed a condition or a disability or being part of a particular group. But if as companies we invite people to inform us, how better can we create an environment where they can really be themselves? That's a really strong starting point. And employee resource groups are those voices. And for me, simply put, that is what they are. They are voices of people who work in your organization, who experience life in your organization. And if we can do better, we should strive to do so. Hopefully that answers the question a little bit with certainly our viewpoints. And If anyone has anything in the chat that they'd like to share about how they feel, sort of about intersectionality or challenges that they might feel their workplace might have, tackling this, please do share this with us. I don't think there are any others in the chat at this moment in time. So I'll just hand over to Chrissy so she can let you know about some of the other initiatives and things that are going on this week for London International Shipping Week. And then hopefully you can join as many of those as possible, and also some of our other network meetings.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cecilia. So again, thank you so much for everyone today. I can see another question coming in, which I'll just come to in a second. Just to highlight a few of the other activities that are happening for diversity in maritime this week. So tomorrow morning we have our Women in Summit. Women in Maritime was launched at London International Shipping Week a few years ago now, and we really want to share where we're up to with that journey with some other groups as well. So for the first time, we're going to be partnering with Women in Transport, Women in Rail, and Women in Aviation International. We're going to share our journeys, being very open and honest about progress to date, and see how we can join forces and have an even bigger voice. So that is tomorrow morning. That is again going to be live streamed. If you can't make it, please don't worry, because we will be sharing the recording afterwards. On Thursday, we are going to be having a really important topic around breaking down the stigma of mental health and mental ill health. We're joined by a fabulous panel, and that webinar will kickstart at 12 noon on Thursday. And on Friday, talking about the intersectional approach, we'll be drawing upon all the themes we've been discussing this week. We'll be bringing together the chairs of the task force and some industry leaders, and we'll be talking about what's been the key takeaways of the sessions this week, but what more can we do as a collaborative voice? And that session will be held after the Maritime Skills Commission's Educational Showcase on Friday. These are all available on our website, so please do have a look. But obviously any questions, or if anybody can't find the link, please do feel free to contact me at info@maritimeuk.org. Cecilia, if you're happy, are you okay if I just go to see what the question is?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, for minorities, particularly Black women, there's often a fear of being labelled as aggressive if hurt or anger at a racist incident or microaggression is expressed in the workplace, where the onus particularly is on remaining professional, accepting, educational. How do you still hold space for those who are angry or hurt by something that's happened, and create an environment where there is no fear of retribution if these emotions are displayed? Wow, okay. I think that's a really interesting one, because we hear that a lot. And I go back to one of Graham's first points about how powerful language is. And labels, I find, help us very often make sense of the world, but they can, when they're erroneously given, can be really harmful. And certainly they can just cause rifts. And we hear it very often about sort of Black females being labelled as aggressive, or I have an Asian colleague who said that in the previous 3 workplaces, he was always labelled the IT guy. So there are so many things that we use in our everyday language which are tricky to navigate. But I think for me it's sort of disarming those people who use those labels if you can. And I think, like Samar was saying earlier, when you're in a situation of when it's raw and when you feel hurt, or when you feel that something has really targeted your sense of belonging, or who you are and your identity, then it is very hard to step back. But labels, I mean, I always find swapping labels is a good way of disarming people. So if someone sort of says, oh, that was a bit aggressive of you, I either would ask, well, if John answered in that way, would you have called him aggressive? Or would you have said, way to go, John, that was great. Yeah, really strong answer, for example. Or I found actually I was quite confident, you know, instead of, and just swap the words. I think sometimes, and I think that's maybe another way of calling on. So you're not telling the person off for using, you know, that particular adjective towards you, but you are swapping it, hopefully, hence by making them think, oh yes, actually, you know, had it been someone else, I wouldn't have used that particular term, or yeah, it was a confident answer, really. That would be my take. I don't know whether that completely answers the question, but I think it is really difficult. And personally, I'm very passionate and hot-headed, so I'm not the best person to reply to the calm and collected sort of approach. But I have, you know, it's a learning journey as we're discussing, and I have learned that that's so far has worked for me. You know, that you choose your own adjective, and I think when someone tries to define you, I try and redefine myself. So if someone has said, you know, oh, that was a bit aggressive, I then redefine myself, and I think, oh no, actually, I thought that answer rocked, or I thought I was quite, you know, I felt quite confident in what I said. And I don't know whether, Carla says swapping aggressive with assertive. Absolutely. It's let's you know, turn language a little bit on its head. There's a great talking about language. It just made me think of something. I don't know if anyone's come across it, but it's called the gender decoder. And you can actually put your job adverts, you can run them through this AI technology, and it will highlight you know, words which are particularly attractive to you know, different genders. And so similarly, I'd love to see a, you know, positive versus negative sort of adjectives decoder that helps you swap and says, you know, why don't we talk about, yes, assertive instead of aggressive, or confident, or you know, knowledgeable. You know, all of those in a particular situation could be swapped over. What do you think, Louisa? Sorry, I was just, because I was thinking about something that Louisa Joseph has said in one of the networks.
Yeah.
Sorry, Samar.
No, I agree. I think if you see it happen, if there's an incident at work and you know, someone has experienced a microaggression and they are a black woman and they're upset, visibly upset, and you're watching it happen, and someone afterwards, you know, when she leaves the room, that's often where I think that happens, isn't it? Or that was a bit, you know, a bit over the top or a bit aggressive. If you are the bystander seeing something like that, it is just, you know, being actively, I guess, supportive and saying, I don't think I would describe it as that, you know, explaining, you know, she's just affronted with this situation, or this happened to her, and that must have been, you know, it was visibly upsetting. So I'm not sure I would use the word aggressive. So just, yeah, supporting and standing up for black women. And yeah, it's tricky thinking about the other way, you know, when I'm given it labels. I think it's definitely been a journey in me being more confident in being able to stand up for myself. And that's, you know, kind of said about swapping, you know, putting assertive in there, or, you know, your hints. But yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, there's an extra comment here from the person who posted the previous question. Sorry if it was a big question. Yes, it was, but maybe, so it was more about having policies in place to protect those people who are affected. So maybe set aside all resources available for employee counselling and mental health days. Absolutely, absolutely. So, well, mental health first aid training I would highly recommend. I think the sort of investment in that completely is offset by the benefits of having trained mental health first aiders. But certainly if your company maybe doesn't have an employee assistance program, or a sort of 24-hour anonymous and confidential helpline, that might help. But having policies in place, I think, is important. But I think it's more important that you talk about the culture that you want to have, and that as leaders, as Graham was saying earlier, having that visible leadership and that empathic leadership that shows concern for the culture that they want, and shows drive in wanting that culture to change. And for me, Graham, you mentioned earlier about sometimes it means, looking back and saying, well, maybe we were racist before and then now we're trying to be non-racist, or whatever the before and after is. But again, we could put a positive spin and say, we're trying to change. We're on a learning journey, and actually maybe before there were elements of or that could be perceived as, but actually now we're trying to put things in place that are, positive steps towards, cultivating a company culture that is understanding of people's lived experiences and kind. I think sometimes, policies are great but they're very cold. And I sort of feel that having and enabling discussions and roundtables and, even in your team meetings, or if you have weekly sessions with your team, maybe just have a topic, each week, a sort of 5-10 minute check-in on how are we doing on XYZ, or even introduce things. If we're sort of talking about leadership, you can introduce, something in maybe their sort of end of year appraisal or something like that. How inclusive of a leader am I? And for people to feedback and comment on that. I think if you have leaders that really want to change, they'll also be humble enough to accept, your comments and use that for their learning. Carla, oh, bye, Debbie. Just read that Debbie's leaving. We're often more passionate about our viewpoint or in our message as we have been shut down, not listened to or respected. That is indeed very true. But I think there's nothing wrong with passion. And again, if someone maybe uses that as a label or a negative connotation or has a negative slant on that, I would say that it's equally important whether you have or have not, been shut down or listened to or respected. I think again it comes back to how do we feel about something happening, even if it's not to us, even if we're not the ones who have been shut down. Depending on the size of your companies, there will be someone somewhere who has had a behaviour that's, again, unintentional towards them or even intentional. So it is really important that you have that passion to make that change. But again, I think I bring it back to sort of accountability. We need to drive the change that we want to see, whether it's happened to us or not. I think if you want to have a inclusive culture, you need to just take stock yourself of the things that you can do. And actually, I think it's great. Sometimes I think, well, passion is infectious. It's not just the negative, hatred, as we heard in the TED talk. It's not just hatred that spreads, but passion is also infectious. And I think if you get people on board your journey, they'll feel enriched through it. I don't know if Graham, you had anything else you wanted to add on that, or sort of whether you have mental health first aiders or health days.
Yeah, I mean, we have mental health first aiders. We have trim as well for sort of any traumatic events or things like that happen. And then we've also got the Department of Defence Community Mental Health. I can't remember Department of Community Mental Health, but we've got our own mental health workers as well. So that side of it is slightly different. I think if somebody was, accused of being aggressive, then with a bit of almost cultural knowledge about that angry black woman trope, I think, as a leader, you would approach it. If they're directing what you perceive as aggression or, you know, assertiveness towards you, then definitely, you know, channel it and actually recognize that that person, you know, is probably passionate about that subject and there's a reason for that passion. It's not something that they just decided to be passionate about. But at the same time, if somebody's telling you about an incident, you have to view it through how they see it. And if that's, you know, oh, she was being angry and things like that, then you have to actually think, well, is this what actually happened or is this what they perceived it to be? Because of that label, you know, and I think a little bit of, I don't like the term cultural competence because I don't think you can ever be competent in, like, you know, everybody's culture, but it's almost a humility to constantly want to learn and understand, and question things. So yeah, I think it touched on intersectionality a little bit as well, because I see a lot of, you know, assertive women who are labeled as being aggressive, and actually you think, well, why is that? You know, why does that challenge you as a man? Because that woman has spoken up when historically maybe, you know, they weren't able to or wouldn't have. And why do you see that as a challenge, as an, you know, as aggression rather than them just being an assertive leader or an assertive person? So I think that label says more about the person applying it than it does about the person being labeled as it. You know, because I've seen you know, a lot of passionate people in my time. I'm yet to see you know, well, I'm not saying I've never seen an angry black woman, but if they were, it's for exactly the same reason why anybody else would be angry, not because they are a black woman, and that's just the way they are. So yeah, I think, yeah, just constantly questioning that sort of those labels that we, you know, stereotypes as well that we apply. Yeah, so that's all I'd add.
Samara, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think
We've exhausted. We've exhausted.
all good points, May.
Yes, absolutely. There's a comment in the chat. Well, interesting. And really, well, I've loved chairing this session, and I'd really like to thank our two other panelists and Chrissy for making this all happen this whole week. It's been absolutely fantastic, and thank you very much for everyone giving up your time to be with us, and for your comments. If you are interested, as Chrissy said, all of the dates are on the website. The next Ethnicity Maritime session is on the 12th of October. So if you'd like to... oh, sorry.
Don't come on the 16th.
It's on the 12th, and if you'd like to come along, that would be great. And hopefully, yeah, you can help drive the change that I think the network really wants to, you know, have an impact in our industry, and hopefully have more enthused, passionate, and really interesting topics to be addressed, and conversations where, yeah, everyone can bring their view to the table, and absolutely everyone is invited. So we'd love to see you there. Chrissy, would you like to say anything else?
I just want to say a big thank you to Cecilia, our fabulous chair. Thank you for hosting the session today.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Samar. Thank you so much, Graham, for being on the panel today. Thank you so much to everyone who also zoomed in. We're really, really grateful. We really do hope this was an informative session. We will be sharing the recording afterwards, but continue to be part of our dialogue. We warmly welcome you to come into a network meeting. If you haven't been in before, please feel free to duck in and see if it's useful. But if not that one of our other networks. Once again, we're very, very grateful to the Diversity Maritime Programme sponsors, Aberdeen Harbour Board and Stena Line, for really supporting our work. Thank you so much to you all, and we'll close the session. Thank you and take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.